Hey y'all, welcome back to Seriously Stump'd. I just received shipment of this brand new stump grinder from MechMaxx, the SG24. I had my eye on these subcompact compatible stump grinders for quite some time, and I just couldn't decide between the big three, the Woodland Mills, the Balma Light, or this one by MechMaxx. Ultimately, the deciding factor for me was that this one was $400 cheaper and it offered free shipping. So if you've had your eye on these products and you can't decide, stick around today and we'll unbox this one, see what it's all about, try to get it hooked up to this subcompact series tractor from Kubota, and then we'll use these Harbor Freight caster wheels to repurpose the shipping crate into a shop cart on wheels. But if this does interest you and you'd like to stay stumped, it's on you. We'll catch you on the next one. So I'm not gonna lie, when this guy backed up and I saw that he didn't have any kind of other gear to get this thing off, I was pretty intimidated, but the way we were able to lower it down seemed to work. I would just be weary if you weren't gonna be home when this thing was delivered. Hey!
Yeah.
Without further ado, no fuss, no muss, let's get into it. Bury the blade, ready to go to work. As I continued to unbolt the stump grinder from the shipping crate, I realized that we're going to end up with some extra bolts and locking nuts, which I thought was really cool just because I always love repurposing stuff. It's a good time to take a break and explain where we're at. We were able to take this top piece of the crate off. That freed up our protective plate that we're going to end up having to mount on this side of the stump grinder. The only thing I see worrisome so far, it's not probably a big deal at all, but one of our teeth right here have been scraping on our metal crate during shipment, but these things are built for much more durability than that for sure. So we're going to continue busting this thing out and then get it hooked up to the tractor. And at this moment, I knew I should have opened the directions a little sooner, because as I was backing in, I realized that the top bracket was mounted upside down due to the shipping constraints. Let's take a quick inventory before we get too far. So here, the top link bracket is installed upside down due to the shipping space constraints. And what you'll see is here on the back of the top link of our 3-point quick hitch, as you'll see, there's really no room with this all the way down. So what it is the shipping crate has them mount this upside down. So we'll just have to flip that over, remove that carriage bolt, flip it over and bolt it up. But luckily, the instructions are super clear. Honestly, I was expecting much less. But what we get here is, like I just talked about earlier, our deflector. So we'll be mounting that up. We'll be flipping over our top bracket. We have a chainsaw holder. We have our manual tube here. It gets mounted on. Here's what it'll all look like at the end. And then over here we have our PTO with our clutch. And there's some work-in period of this where you have to adjust the spring tension and make sure you got the proper slippage. So we'll be doing that later. They even give you an extra MechMaxx sticker. It's pretty cool, but we're gonna get back at it. So here you'll see me come over with the manual tube. I'm going to keep the spanner wrench, that way we can always keep our teeth tightened and good to go. All right, Stunt fam, welcome back. My camera died and I kept working because I got to get this done, but we got the manual tube installed. We used the wrench that they supplied in the tube with the supplied bolts to get it installed. So it was a 10mm bolt here, 10mm bolt here with the locking nut on the back. Then we got our chainsaw holder here installed. It was just 2 bolts with the supplied wrench. They're 17mm. We got that all good to go. And then we got our deflector plate installed, and it's 13mm bolts, 3, and then on the bottom it's got locking nuts on the bottom of it too. So the only other thing we did was check out our PTO shaft. We're gonna have to get to the run-in procedure on it another day. And then we backed up the tractor with a 3-point quick hitch and got it all ready to go for first lift. That way we can get it off this crate. All right, so we've reached the point where we're gonna hook up the PTO shaft to the stump grinder and then to the tractor. We're gonna keep the clutch inside on the stump grinder side, but to do that, we need to verify some distances first. So the factory ships the PTO at 34 inches. We need to look at our locking grooves on our stump grinder. We need to have it level with our locking grooves on our tractor. And we need to measure the distance from these locking grooves to these locking grooves over here. And if that distance is greater than 1 inch or 1 inch or greater than the shipped factory distance of 34 inches on your PTO, then we're good to go. So we're gonna get into that now. Hindsight's always 20/20, but at this point, that's when I would have taken those bolts out of the clutch side of the PTO. That way it could slide on. I was thinking that it would have a normal locking pin, but the clutch side does not. You'll see that later in the video as well. So we got the tractor end all hooked up. There is a locking pin up here that you have to verify clicks in to your locking grooves on your PTO shaft. So we got that all locked in and good to go. All right, so we've been struggling for a while now. I think my measurements were a little off. Maybe it was some wishful measuring, but the distance for measurement A in the directions have you needing to be at 35 inches from the PTO on the tractor to the PTO on the stump grinder. And after remeasuring, I believe we're at like 34 1/4. So I'm gonna need to trim the PTO shaft. So we're gonna do that now. All right, so I've never trimmed a PTO shaft before, and I found it really difficult to get the inch marking on here, but I found some blue painter's tape, and that's about 1 inch wide. So we're gonna take 1 inch off the PTO shaft and the PTO collar on each side. I also don't have a vise, so we've rigged up something with these tie straps. So I decided to use my 4-inch angle grinder to cut this PTO shaft. You'll see me bust out the skill saw, but I wouldn't recommend that as it was just going to walk all over the place. My recommendation is that if you don't have a portable bandsaw, I would stick to an angle grinder or a Dremel tool, whatever you have available. So we got both ends of the PTO shaft cut. It wasn't too bad. We just got to burr the ends off because you don't want anything catching when they're sliding in and out. And we got to cut the collar. So I'm going to use these shears to get the collar. At least that's what I'm going to start with. it would help if you did this. So at this point, off camera, I shifted over to a different 4-inch angle grinder wheel to knock off the burrs left from the cuts that we made. A file would really come in handy, but the only file I could find was one for sharpening a chainsaw blade. And it did alright, it's just not super efficient, so I probably wouldn't recommend using one. So this end of the PTO that goes to the stump grinder that has the clutch on it comes with these 18mm bolts that slide into these sleeves right here. And you have to make sure that you're completely lined up with the grooves on the PTO for the end of the stump grinder before you put the bolts back in. So we finally got the PTO hooked up. I'll reiterate that the directions are really clear and my wishful measuring is what caused me the biggest headache. So if your tractor grooves on your PTO and the grooves on the stump grinder are not at 35 inches or greater, then it's not going to work and you need to go ahead and trim your PTO shaft like we just did. But once you trim your PTO shaft, everything goes on pretty smoothly. So now we got to do the clutch run in, and what we have to do is we have to back these nuts off these bolts to where they're flush with the end of the bolt. And then we have to tighten them in accordance with the horsepower of your tractor. So for this tractor, it's going to be 1.26 inches that we're going to need to have the spring compressed at. We're going to go ahead and loosen all these up now at a 16mm, and we're just going to back out everything. Here you'll see me use a chalk marker to mark the initial position of our clutch prior to our run-in so we can verify slippage. Here you'll see me engage the PTO twice, letting it come to a complete stop in between intervals. I'm not sure we actually needed to do it twice, but the instructions laid it out that way, so we followed it. Alright, so as you can tell, we had some slippage, so now we just need to tighten these back up to where I think there's like 4 threads showing, and then we'll measure again, but that should be 1.26 inches on the spring. Alright, Stump fam, so we're almost getting down to business now. The last thing we got to do is test the tightness of all 34 of our teeth using the included spanner wrench with a 24mm socket. Shortly after getting this ring all assembled, my son came home and he was asking how this thing works. And I was telling him how it turns stumps into wood chips, and he was like, kind of like how beavers do with their beaver teeth. And I was like, yep, leave it to the 7-year-old for the creative content. Ooh. So far, all 3 of these that are pointing like this have been loose. Everything else has been really, really snug. That's it. Alright, so the machine comes fully greased, but right in here, there's a grease fitting on the outside of the flywheel bearing. And then in here on the inside of the flywheel bearing, there's a grease fitting. And then on your PTO shaft on each end, here and up there where it connects to the tractor, there's a grease fitting there as well. And then there are 2 other grease fittings, and they are up here at your pivot points, right here and then on the opposite side as well. As promised, here you'll see me turn the shipping crate into a shop cart on wheels using casters from Harbor Freight. All I had to do was break out the drill and some self-tapping screws. Once we got those in, it held up pretty firmly. I'll add some wood here in the future to make it a little more useful, but for now, I'm happy with it. Alright, Stump fam. A few final notes. I'd say we found some serenity in getting this thing all hooked up and buttoned up and ready to go grind some stumps. We just got to keep this tractor out the mud and go chase some fool's gold. Just wanted to give a few final plugs and shout outs to MechMaxx because they've been great throughout this whole thing. Their operator's manual won't leave you dazed and confused, so trust it and trust what you saw in this video, not your wishful measurements if you're like us and you make those. You got to cut your PTO, do it early. Don't lay on the ground too long because it's hotter than the Sahara Desert, especially here in the Carolinas. As you saw, we had 34 teeth on this thing that are ready to go grind some stumps. You got to get those tightened up. That way it's not a time to kill around here because I don't think any of us are ready to die. But I don't really have much more for you. I'm excited to get this thing up and running, grind some stumps, because the last thing we want is to have a failure to launch our business within the first 10 days. But as always, y'all stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll catch you on the next one. So I haven't mentioned this yet, but the stump grinder that you've seen in this video today is actually sold out. It's because they have a 3-month lead time on it, but I believe their green one is still available if that's something you would want. So you can either wait on the orange one for 3 months when they get back in stock, or you can go ahead and order the green one. Either way, I'll post an affiliate link in the description of this video and a coupon code where you can get 5% off.